Reported hate crimes have been rising for the last few years against a number of groups. Now, attacks against Asian Americans are on the rise. This week in Los Angeles, the Higashi Honganji Buddhist temple was vandalized and burned. The temple is in LA's Little Tokyo neighborhood near downtown. Between March and December of last year, the group Stop AAPI Hate received 2,800 accounts of anti-Asian hate incidents across the U.S. AAPI refers to Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. COVID-19 is clearly a factor in all this. Last April, a third of Americans reported witnessing someone blame Asians for the virus. Some link this to former President Trump repeatedly using slurs like, excuse the expression, China virus to describe the pandemic. He said it again today at CPAC, and the audience cheered. After he was diagnosed with COVID-19 in October, the Anti-Defamation League found that anti-Asian sentiment on Twitter rose more than 85%. But let's be clear. Asians and Asian Americans have been exoticized, demonized, and ridiculed for centuries in America. This runs much deeper than COVID. House Democrats held a roundtable on this last week. California Congressman Mark Takano called it a latent bias in our society that fluctuates depending on the moment. How long will this moment last? And what will make it pass? Joining us now is actress and comedian Margaret Cho. She plays Auntie Ling in the animated film Over the Moon on Netflix. It was nominated at the Golden Globes tonight for Best Animated Feature Film. Margaret, good evening. It's a pleasure to have you.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
Congratulations on the nomination. I'm sorry that the award did not go quite your way, but I think it's fabulous to have films like this on Netflix providing this kind of representation.
Yes.
How much do you think that representation is built into what we're seeing now with these attacks? Either misrepresentation, a lack of full three-dimensional representation of Asians and Asian Americans. How much of this is a representation issue?
Well, it's a long time in the making, whether it's this silent minority that we've kind of been. It's also this invisibility, this kind of othering, this idea that we still have a strange label of foreignness, even though I was born in America. There's like many generations that have been born in America are from here, but we're seeing this very ignorant people lashing out at the Asian American community, especially older Asian Americans, which is really a terrible thing. It's very disheartening. And it starts with the ignorance that Trump was spouting about it being the China virus and the Kung flu, which aren't even really funny jokes. I mean, it's just this thing that he kind of relies on. But really, it does remind me a lot of all of the homophobia and anti-gay hate crimes that occurred during the age of AIDS. You know, in a lot of ways, myself included, we've been through a pandemic before, and these are the signs of it, is people lashing out with anger, with rage at everybody else who's also suffering.
I wonder how you, in terms of the depictions of Asians and Asian Americans, view your role in terms of the overall view of how Americans view Asians and Asian Americans. A lot of your comedy has been about your cultural background, growing up in a Korean American family. Obviously, the series you did in the 90s, All American Girl. You've done some wonderfully endearing stories about your mom that just kind of will be with me forever, that are hilarious and endearing and lovely. And I think they're great. I always kind of wonder, though, like, where the line is. You know, at what point the comedy goes from being endearing to possibly being worrisome, or the kind of thing that someone uses to build a stereotype around. How do we walk that line?
Well, I think it's about, you know, the ability for an artist to tell your own story, which is what I've been doing. And I think that there's like a lot of well-meaning people who say, well, is this, you know, going into stereotyping? Are we going into caricature as opposed to real true story? But I mean, I couldn't depict my mother any other way. It would really sound strange if she turned into Dame Judi Dench. So it would be really weird. I think it's really important to just tell the stories as they are remembered in my life. And so What I do think is that since there's this very tough economic thing happening here, and then the most popular images of Asian Americans in the media are the super rich ones, the ones from Crazy Rich Asians and Bling Empire. So it's like this framing of not only did we quote unquote cause this pandemic, we're also living it up in the pandemic, and it's really just, I mean, to me, I really entertained by those shows. I mean, I love that movie, and I actually love Bling Empire a lot. I think it's really great. But it's also that you only see a small portion of the community, and they seem very well off. So there's a lot of things that are sort of like you're adding fuel to the fire that Trump started.
Yeah. Now that you've brought it up, I am now picturing my mother as Judi Dench. That will not go out of my brain for the rest of the night.
I know.
It's fabulous. Son, please come down to dinner. We are having collard greens. That's going to be with me for the rest of the night. Let me ask you though about what should be done. I know that California has announced that they're allocating $1.4 million in funding to help track hate crimes against Asian Americans. What do you think needs to be done? Is it a matter of spending money? Is it governmental assistance? Are there people who need to show more allyship to Asians and Asian Americans? Where should we start?
Yeah. I think all of those places are great places to go to, but also it's within our own kind of power to tell our stories. And, you know, I feel like the long and complicated history of every different Asian group that's come here to become Asian American usually deals with some kind of war and deals with a lot of PTSD from those wars. And so the way that my family coped with it was a kind of silence around all the terrible things they experienced, not just the war, but also the racism they, experienced firsthand coming here in 1964. So it's about unwrapping all of these kind of like very cultural approaches towards trauma and using a very Americanized view towards trauma and healing, and bringing ourselves to a place where we can have healing and can unite with each other. I think that's really important. So the more news coverage we get, the more voices are out there on social media, the better.
And could I just ask you one more thing just about one of the other issues that's very important to you? We mentioned this week that the House passed the Equality Act, which would write sexual orientation and gender identity into our non-discrimination laws as a country. I wonder what your sense is of where we stand on discrimination and laws for LGBTQIA people. We talked last night about transgender Americans in so-called red states, but what is your view of where we stand as a country now before we go?
Well, we have to undo a lot of the damage that was done during the Trump administration. And he's still, even in CPAP this week, is like trying to, protect the women in sports, which is a crazy thing. I mean, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, LGBTQIA rights. Like, as if he's ever cared about women in sports anyway. It's a very strange thing. But he's speaking to his base, which unfortunately are very misinformed, especially about the trans community. We've been having this fight with him about the bathrooms, and since the bathrooms in North Carolina. So it's a very strange thing that they want to protect the sanctity of gender, which was really, it's outrageous.
That was a very weird moment at CPAC today. He said, we must protect the integrity of women's sports. And then after he made that kind of transphobic remark, somebody said, well, that's going to be very controversial. I said, that's okay. You haven't heard anything yet. And the crowd cheered. Margaret Cho, I really appreciate you being with us tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.